calls for calm, but the fallout continues. The Saudi Arabia-Iran row deepens as more countries sever diplomatic ties with Tehran. Also on today's program, hundreds dead and a president refusing outside help. Is Burundi heading towards civil war? And in Picture This, we look at what's top of the tech toy list for 2016. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. They've never been best of friends, but could a political row between Saudi Arabia and Iran be turning into something more sinister? The diplomatic fallout following Saudi Arabia's execution of Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr last week led to mass demonstrations. Protests soon translated into politics, and the Saudis severed diplomatic ties with Iran. As some regional nations started to pick sides in the Middle Eastern powerhouse rift, Turkey and others in the international community called for calm. But this war of words is already being played out as a proxy war across parts of the Middle East, in Yemen and Syria. And the struggle for dominance in the region is becoming a growing reality. Today's newsmaker is Saudi Arabia, as we ask if this tension between two of the Middle East's most powerful states could escalate out of control.
Two regional powers that can't seem to get along. Both want to become the preeminent country in the Middle East. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the region's biggest oil producer with the largest economy. More than 80% of the people there are Sunni Muslims, including the ruling royal family. They're allied to Israel and the United States. And across the Gulf is Iran, the region's second biggest oil producer with the second largest economy. More than 90% of the population is Shia Muslim, including the clerics who rule the country. In the past, they threatened to destroy Israel and the United States with nuclear weapons. But the balance of power could be about to shift. Iran could be in for a $100 billion windfall as it abandons its nuclear ambitions in exchange for the lifting of sanctions and opening up of international trade. The fallout from Saudi's execution of Shia cleric Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr has been swift and wide-ranging.
The Saudi royal family, by executing Sheikh Nimr, opened the gates of hell for their rule and their power.
The dispute between Saudi Arabia and Iran rippled across the region, driving up oil prices and threatening to widen the sectarian divide in the Middle East. The rift between Sunni and Shia Muslims in the Middle East runs like a tectonic fault line along what Jordan's King Abdullah called the Shia Crescent. It starts in Lebanon in the north and curves through Syria and Iraq to the Gulf and Iran. In politics, as in war, sides are often chosen along sectarian lines. The conflict in Yemen is just the latest example where Iran and Saudi are accused of backing rival armies in a proxy war. In 1979, modern Iran was founded when the Islamic Revolution deposed the monarchy of the Shah. Less than a year later, Saudi Arabia and its allies funded Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran. During Lebanon's 15-year civil war, Iran supported Hezbollah in its fight against Saudi-backed militias. And in almost 5 years of war in Syria, Iran is said to have spent up to $20 billion propping up Bashar al-Assad, while Saudi funds a loose coalition of his enemies. Saudi and Iran were both involved in international peace talks aimed at ending the Syrian war. They're scheduled for later this month. Those talks now look uncertain. Saudi and some allies have suspended diplomatic ties with Iran. Commercial links and travel are being cut. And Iran accuses Saudi of ratcheting up tensions on purpose to further its own political agenda. Against this backdrop of conflict, hopes that peace can be found in Syria are fading fast. Jerome Evans, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss those growing tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia is Abdul Latif Al-Mulhim. He's in Bahrain and a columnist for Arab News and Al-Yawm newspaper. We're also joined by Ali Al-Ahmed, a scholar from the Institute for Gulf Affairs in Washington, D.C. And in Tehran is political analyst and writer Imad Abshinas. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Let's start with you, Abdul Latif Al-Mulhim. Let's talk about intentions for a moment. Was the Saudi execution of Nimr al-Nimr and its timing a deliberate attempt to provoke Iran and kick off more chaos in the region?
First of all, I'm honored to be with you, but this is absolutely outrageous accusation that Saudi Arabia did the execution of Nimr al-Nimr on a timely basis to provoke the Iranians. He's not the only one who's being put to death. There were 47 convicted terrorists that had been tried and found guilty, and Saudi Arabia punishment for terrorism is death. But it has nothing to do with the sectarian profiling.
Okay. Ali Al-Ahmed, this is an outrageous accusation. It has nothing to do with sectarian profiling. What do you think?
Well, you know, when it comes to sectarian, I think Saudi Arabia takes the gold. You know, we did a study about Saudi Arabia's government representation last year. There is zero Shia in the judiciary, zero Shia in the diplomacy, zero Shia in security, zero Shia in the Council of Ministers, zero Shia in the mayors. There are not a single Shia mayor in Saudi Arabia. So the top Saudi government muftis, the official religious body, which is also void of any Shia, publicly says Shia are apostate and they are not our brothers. And this has been very clearly the government of Saudi Arabia's policy versus the Shia.
Whether this was intentional or not, there was a response from Iran, and we're seeing this fallout now. Let's talk about intentions on the Iranian side now. Imad Abshinas, did Iranian authorities allow the mob to set ablaze that embassy in Tehran and attack the consulate in Mashhad? Do you think that was deliberate?
Well, no, I'm sure that the Iranian authorities, they didn't want such an attack to happen because Iran had a card, was able to use this card against Saudi Arabia, and now it lost the card. So I'm sure that the Iranian authorities, they didn't want such a thing happen, but because of the tense situation which used to exist between the Iranian public and Saudi Arabia, because lately we had the problems in Hajj, and after that, exactly after that, the execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr happened. There was a very tense situation in the public against Saudi Arabia, and they lost control on the public. Mainly, the problem was just losing control on the public, and if you look around, it's not like that Nimr al-Nimr is one of the 47. You can just add Nimr al-Nimr to the other 46 people there. Okay. Nimr al-Nimr himself is equivalent to 46,000
Imad, I just want
others.
One follow-up before I bring Abdul Latif back in. Sorry to interrupt you, Imad. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said, and I quote him, "God's hand of retaliation will grip the neck of Saudi politicians." Now, that is hardly a peace offering from him. If he's lost control of the public, why is he saying things like this instead of trying to calm tensions?
Well, mainly this sentence, if it is translated as word by word, it may mean what you said. But in the Persian, it means we will let God take care of those who made these procedures, and God will take care of them. This would have been the least thing that the leader would say to calm down the situation in Iran, because the tensions were very high, and it was not probable to control the tensions between the public, except if the leader, the president, and the officials would have interfered.
Okay, so you think those words were meant to calm down the public. Abdul Latif Al-Mulhim, you want to come in?
Well, I have two things to add. First of all, as far as the Shia in Saudi Arabia, they are treated like the other citizens, the Sunnis, and many of my, technically all my friends and classmates are holding top positions in the military, in Aramco, and as a matter of fact, two of my classmates are the in the Shura Council. And as far as the Iranian attack on the Saudi embassy in Tehran. I'm not finished yet. For the attack on the embassy in Tehran, this is not the first time that the Iranians have attacked foreign embassies. They have attacked American embassies, British embassies, and in the past. As far as positions for the Shia, they are holding positions that, frankly, I would even dream of. What many people are playing is simply playing the sectarian divide for their own good. I mean, Iran are using a few of the Shiites in Saudi Arabia, and they're very few, to simply promote violence in the kingdom. And Nimr al-Nimr was technically everything about the government that was negative, he had said it. At the same time, when he was being investigated,
do you believe he deserved to be killed?
Well, to me personally, according to what he had been done in his hometown, yes, he deserved. And at the same time, when he was being investigated, his wife being treated on the expenses of the Saudi government, and his relatives and family members are being sent to the best schools in the United States. We have nothing. I mean, technically, I have, childhood friends who are Shia, and I still cherish and respect their friendship to this day.
Ali Al-Ahmed Abdul Latif has Shia friends.
This is the typical American whites when they said, "Oh, I'm not racist. My mailman is black." So look, let's be honest here. This is, the Saudi government is a racist, sectarian government. This is not like a new discovery. Everybody knows it. The fact that there is not a single Shia mayor in the country, that tells you, a lot. That the fact that the top religious leaders, the Saudi government, king appointed, say that the Shia are the enemies and they should be wiped out. The problem is the Saudi government, an absolute monarchy, cannot fulfill the needs of its people, so it must export its problems.
Imad Abshinis, looking at the amount of nations who have cut ties with Iran in the aftermath of the spat, it's not just Saudi Arabia. You have Bahrain, you have the Emiratis, the United Arab Emirates, you have the Kuwaitis, you even have as far afield as Sudan. Why do you think all these countries have a gripe with Iran, other than the fact that maybe Iran's doing some very bad things?
Well, first of all, let me put it in this way. It's some kind of an exaggeration to say that so much countries have cut relations with Iran. Iran never, for the previous 5 or 6 years, Iran didn't have, officially they had a diplomatic relations with, for example, Bahrain and with Sudan, but no Iranian diplomat was in Bahrain, and no Bahraini diplomat was in Tehran. And the same thing for Djibouti or for Sudan. So these are not counted as countries who had relation with Iran and they cut relations with Iran. As to Emirates have had a lot of pressures, and other Persian Gulf Arab countries have had a lot of pressures from Saudi Arabia to cut relations with Iran. And all of these countries, they didn't cut relations with Iran. The Kuwaiti ambassador normally he is not in Tehran for a long period. He is an ambassador to several countries. As to the Emiratis, the least thing they could do to, was that, to say that they will lower the relations, but the relations still exist.
Okay, you don't believe it's as big a deal.
Go on with the Saudis.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. We are running out of time. I'm going to give Abdulatif Al-Mulhim the final word here. The cutting of relations was not that big of a deal, according to Imad Abshinas. And I also, as the final word, I want to know from you, Abdulatif, what you think is going to happen next, because Turkey and other countries are trying to play mediator here and saying, hey guys, come on, let's try to sort this out. Are you optimistic that this can be sorted out?
I hope it doesn't escalate, to be very frank with you. We want to have a stable area. But and I want to ask my Iranian friend, is when was the democracy level in Iran is such a level where protesters can actually attack a foreign embassy? I mean, I think it's a premeditated act. In Iran, you cannot go on riots and attack a foreign installation. You cannot do that in Iran without the government approval.
Okay, I'm going to leave that to be a rhetorical question, because we're losing Imad Abshinas' window in 20 seconds' time. So I don't want him to be cut off here with Calabars, and I'm going to let that be the last word. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Abdulatif Al-Mulhim, Ali Al-Ahmed, and Imad Abshinas. Still to come on the Newsmakers, is Burundi heading towards civil war? And in Picture This, the world of technology gets ready to reveal its latest creations. There are fears the Central African country Burundi could be dragged into civil war this year. The United Nations says 400 people have been killed and more than 200,000 displaced since April last year. The African Union wants to send troops to Burundi to protect civilians. But the president, Pierre Nkurunziza, says that would be considered an attack. As Nicole Johnston reports, the instability is increasing tension between Hutu and Tutsi ethnic communities.
The worst violence in Burundi in years. Street battles, targeted killings, and fears it could all turn into a conflict pitting tribe against tribe, Hutu against Tutsi.
What we have seen over the past few days is chilling.
So how did Burundi start to unravel? President Pierre Nkurunziza, he's been in power since 2005. In April last year, he announced he'd stand in the next election. Demonstrations broke out. Opposition groups argued he was violating the constitution by running for a third term. Nkurunziza said his first term didn't count because he'd been elected by government ministers, not the public. A month later, army officers launched a coup while the president was out of the country. It failed, but the protests didn't stop. Despite the violence and instability, a presidential election was held in June after a court order allowed Nkurunziza to run. He won the vote, but the result was disputed. The US called the election deeply flawed. Burundi was on edge. This country is no stranger to conflict. Divisions between Hutu and Tutsi ethnic groups led to a civil war in 1993. The fighting stopped only 12 years later. 300,000 people had been killed. Nkurunziza is from the dominant Hutu ethnic group. 85% of people in Burundi are Hutu. 14% are Tutsi. In In December, the African Union said it was ready to send 5,000 peacekeepers to Burundi to protect civilians. This is the first time it's invoked its powers to intervene in a member state against its will. But President Pierre Nkurunziza is defiant, warning the AU to keep out.
In case they violate our sovereignty and our borders, every Burundian will rise up and fight them because our country will be under attack. We will protect ourselves.
The international community is deeply worried that a new war is brewing, one that may be fought along ethnic lines, with pro-government Hutu militias battling Tutsi soldiers. Already, the body count is rising. In the worst attack so far, 87 people were killed in one day in December. These are dangerous times in Burundi. Nicole Johnston for the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss what is going on in Burundi is Frank Charnas. He's the CEO of Afrique Consulting Group, who focus on the business and politics of sub-Saharan African countries. Thanks a lot for joining us, Frank. There is a history of ethnic slaughter in Burundi and particularly next door in Rwanda. This time around, it is a crisis. People are dying, but crucially, and this is a big question, are people being slaughtered en masse based on ethnicity?
Hi, first it's a pleasure to be here. Very good question. At this time, there are definitely deaths occurring and there are definitely targeted killings. We've seen at least 400 people killed. The crisis up to this far has been political, but it's very difficult to divorce politics from ethnicity in Burundi. And so while, as of yet, we're not seeing a clean ethnic divide, we're definitely seeing ethnic rhetoric and a definite othering along ethnic lines, which does tend to show us that maybe, firstly, killings will begin to occur down ethnic lines, and secondly, that, again, politics is very difficult to divorce from ethnicity. And given Burundi's history and given the history of at least 2 genocides in Burundi along ethnic lines, so ethnicity is a major worry.
Now, the president began all of this by wanting a third term that many said was unconstitutional. And of course, there was, the foiled coup, as Nicole's report had shown. When he said very recently that if the African Union sends peacekeepers, he will consider that an attack and he will attack them, did he mean it?
It's hard to tell, but it definitely is a rattling of a saber, and it definitely is a warning towards the AU that peacekeepers will not be welcome in Burundi. It's hard to tell whether he would actually attack African Union forces, but the threat is enough to warn off or to ward off African forces.
How strong is the opposition right now?
The opposition is, it's quite strong in that we're seeing some sort of organized militancy amongst the opposition. Also bearing in mind that last year in April we saw mass protests which were amongst the public but are representative of the opposition. However, the opposition probably are not as powerful as Nkurunziza and Nkurunziza's forces.
Yeah, worrying times indeed in Burundi. Thank you very much, Frank. In today's Picture this year's International Consumer Electronics Show is due to open its doors in Las Vegas tomorrow. Take a look at what's expected to be big in the world of tech in 2016. Today's newsmaker has been Saudi Arabia. 3 days after the kingdom executed Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr, tensions between Saudi and Iran have reached boiling point. Diplomatic ties have been severed and a war of words exchanged. The question now is, will the fallout destabilize an already fragile situation in the Middle East? You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. As always, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.